Our story begins in a small, secluded town called Evermore, surrounded by vast, endless cornfields. The locals had stories, whispered in hushed voices, about strange happenings in the fields. People had gone missing in the corn, vanishing without a trace. Some claimed to see shadowy figures moving between the tall stalks at night, while others heard the faint sound of a child's laughter echoing in the dead of night. But the story of the Evermore Cornfield would remain a chilling legend until one night it became much more than that. The dare 17-year-old James and his friends, Emma, Chris, and Lila, decided they'd had enough of hearing the same old tales. Halloween was just around the corner, and they wanted a real thrill. So, they dared each other to spend the night in Evermore Cornfield, armed with only a flashlight, a camera, and their phones. They ventured deep into the cornfield on a chilly October evening, believing it was all just superstition. The moon hung low, casting eerie shadows on the ground, and the cornstalks swayed gently in the breeze, forming a haunting lullaby. But as they walked deeper, an unexplainable heaviness settled over them, thick and oppressive. The rows of corn seemed endless, each stalk standing tall, rustling, as if whispering secrets of the past. The shadows in the corn. As they ventured further, James noticed something peculiar, a scarecrow hanging eerily from a wooden pole. It was dressed in tattered clothes with hollow, empty eyes made from buttons and a crooked grin stitched across its face. But there was something off about it. James couldn't shake the feeling that the scarecrow was watching them. They continued walking, but after a few minutes, Chris thought he saw something move. In the corner of his eye, he saw a dark figure lurking between the corn stalks. He dismissed it as a trick of the light until he saw it again, a shadowy silhouette that seemed to disappear the moment he looked directly at it. The group began to feel an unshakable sense of dread. Lila, clutching her flashlight, whispered, "Maybe we should go back." But James insisted they keep going. They hadn't come all this way just to leave because of a shadow. As they walked deeper, Emma stumbled upon something half buried in the dirt, a tattered notebook. Inside were entries written in a child's scrawl. The entries spoke of a young boy, Tommy, who had lived in Evermore years ago and used to play in the cornfield. The last entry, however, was chilling. "I saw the man in the corn again. He says he's lonely. He wants me to stay and play with him forever." They looked at each other, the color draining from their faces. Who was this man in the corn, and why hadn't anyone heard of Tommy before? They didn't have to wonder long. Suddenly they heard a faint sound, a soft, playful giggle echoing through the corn. It was the laughter of a child, and it seemed to be coming from everywhere at once. Emma called out, but there was no answer, only the eerie laughter that grew louder, more menacing. The cornfield's curse. Panic set in as the group tried to retrace their steps, but it felt as if the field had come alive, twisting and shifting around them, trapping them in a labyrinth. Chris began to run, desperate to find a way out, but tripped and fell. As he looked up, he froze in terror. The scarecrow from before now stood only a few feet away, its stitched grin wider, more sinister. But it wasn't just a scarecrow anymore. Its button eyes seemed to gleam with a life of their own, and its head tilted as if observing him. Lila screamed as shadowy figures emerged from the corn, their faces obscured, but their presence felt disturbingly real. They moved silently, surrounding the group, cutting off any escape. Emma, clutching the notebook, whispered, "This isn't just a field. It's a graveyard. She pointed to the faded words scribbled in the last few pages. "We are the forgotten ones, lost in the corn, forever watching." The endless night. Desperate, James pulled out his phone to call for help, but there was no signal. Suddenly the temperature dropped, and a thick fog rolled in, making it nearly impossible to see beyond a few feet. The figures in the corn were closer now, their faces expressionless, hollow, and then they saw him, a tall, shadowy man with empty eyes, standing at the edge of the fog, just staring. They could hear whispers, disembodied voices calling their names, coaxing them deeper into the corn. It was as if the field itself was alive, hungry for new souls. Chris was the first to break, sprinting in the opposite direction, shouting for the others to follow. But as they ran, the rows of corn seemed to stretch endlessly, and the sound of footsteps echoed behind them, relentless, unyielding. One by one, the group was separated. James found himself alone, panting and exhausted. He stumbled upon another scarecrow, but this one was different. Hanging from its neck was a necklace he recognized as Lila's. Horrified, he turned around to see the shadowy man standing right in front of him, his face inches away. The man's voice was a low, guttural whisper. "You came to play. Now you stay." The last thing James saw was the shadowy man's hollow eyes before everything went dark. The cornfield's secret days. Later the town searched the cornfield but found no trace of the teens, only their scattered belongings. To this day, the Evermore Cornfield remains a place of fear, a place where the lost never truly leave. Locals say, on a quiet night, if you listen closely, you can still hear the laughter of a child and the distant hollow whispers of those who wandered too far into the corn and never returned. The aftermath. A week had passed since the teens vanished. Their families, heartbroken and desperate, begged the authorities to keep searching. The sheriff, a grizzled man who had lived in Evermore his entire life, led search parties into the cornfield every day, but they always came back empty-handed. He knew the stories about the field, knew the rumors about the curse of Evermore Cornfield, but he didn't believe them until strange things began happening to the searchers. One morning, a search team came across a child's toy, half buried in the dirt, a small, worn doll. It wasn't on the sheriff's list of evidence, nor did it belong to any of the missing teens. It was an artifact from years past, faded and weathered, as if it had been there for decades. The sheriff noticed the doll's glassy eyes seemed to stare straight at him, sending a shiver down his spine. Other searchers reported hearing whispers calling their names or seeing shadowy figures darting between the stalks, just out of reach. The sheriff was starting to understand. This field was not merely haunted, it was cursed. The local legend. Desperate for answers, the sheriff went to visit Old Man Higgins, a recluse who had lived on the edge of Evermore for decades. Higgins rarely spoke to anyone, but he had always warned people to stay away from the cornfield, claiming that it took what it wanted. When the sheriff arrived, Higgins was waiting for him on the porch, as if he knew he would come. "Those kids," Higgins began, his voice a raspy whisper. "They're gone. That field swallows people whole. It has for years." Higgins told him the tale of a man named Arthur Finch, a farmer who owned the land in the late 1800s. Finch had lost his wife and child to a tragic accident, and in his grief, he became obsessed with the field, convinced it held a path to the spirit world. Locals claimed he performed dark rituals there, trying to summon his family back from the dead. Eventually, Finch himself vanished, his soul claimed by the field, and since then, anyone who ventured too far into the corn was never seen again. Higgins's voice dropped to a near whisper. Once you're marked by the field, there's no coming back. The field, it remembers. The search continues. The sheriff tried to warn the families, but they insisted on continuing the search. Each day, the search parties ventured further into the cornfield, and each day, strange things happened. Radios malfunctioned, compasses spun wildly, and some searchers even became disoriented, wandering for hours before finding their way back. Then one evening, just as the sun was setting, the sheriff spotted something strange. A faint trail leading deeper into the field, one that hadn't been there before. Desperate, he and his team followed the trail, their flashlights casting long, eerie shadows. The air was thick, almost suffocating, and every step seemed to echo, as if someone or something was walking right behind them. As they walked, they found more remnants from the past. A tattered shoe, a broken locket, an old rusted lunchbox, and then they saw it. A group of scarecrows lined up in a perfect circle, each one facing inward. In the center was a mound of disturbed earth, as if someone had recently dug there. The sheriff's heart pounded as he approached the mound. Something was drawing him closer, a whisper that seemed to echo in his mind, calling his name. He reached out, his hand trembling, and brushed away the dirt, revealing a small, ancient-looking box. The curse. Unleashed. As soon as the sheriff touched the box, he felt a cold chill run down his spine. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, filling his mind with voices, children laughing, people screaming, the rustle of corn. His hands shook as he opened the box, revealing a collection of old photographs, each one showing a child standing in the cornfield, their faces blurred, their eyes hollow. But one photograph caught his attention. It showed a young boy with the same necklace Lila had been wearing, the one they had found near the scarecrow. The boy's face was twisted in terror, his hand outstretched as if trying to escape. Written on the back was a single word, Tommy. Suddenly, the field around them erupted with movement. The scarecrows seemed to come alive, their hollow button eyes watching, their twisted grins widening. The sheriff tried to step back, but it was too late. The field had marked him now, and he knew there would be no escape. The vanishing. That night, the sheriff didn't come home. His team searched for him, but all they found was his flashlight, flickering weakly in the dirt, surrounded by the scattered remnants of the box's contents. The sheriff had become another one of Evermore Cornfield's secrets. Word spread quickly, and fear gripped the town. People stopped going near the field, and the legend of Evermore Cornfield grew. Some claimed to see the sheriff's ghost wandering the edge of the field at night, calling out to the lost teens. Others said they could hear the faint sound of his voice, warning them to stay away, a caution that was heeded by all, except for those who couldn't resist the lure of the haunted cornfield. The field that remembers. Years passed, and the cornfield remained untouched, an eerie relic of the past. But every once in a while, when the moon was full, townsfolk would hear whispers carried on the wind, whispers that spoke of the lost souls trapped in the corn. And if you dared to enter, some claimed you could see them, the ghostly figures of James, Emma, Chris, Lila, the sheriff, and even Tommy, their faces blank, their eyes hollow, forever wandering the field, searching for an escape they would never find. The Evermore Cornfield had claimed them, as it had claimed so many others, a cursed place where the past and present converged, where memories and shadows lingered, hungry for the next soul, foolish enough to wander too far. And so, the legend of Evermore Cornfield lived on, a chilling reminder of the horrors that lay hidden in the heart of the corn, waiting for the next victim to join its unending nightmare. A new face in town. Several years after the sheriff's disappearance, the town of Evermore was visited by a young historian named Sarah. She specialized in local legends and supernatural lore, and had heard whispers of the infamous Evermore Cornfield. Intrigued by the tales of missing people, ghostly sightings, and mysterious artifacts, Sarah was determined to uncover the truth. She arrived in Evermore on a brisk autumn morning, carrying only a backpack filled with research notes, a journal, and an old recorder. The townsfolk were cautious, warning her to stay far from the cornfield, but Sarah's curiosity was unrelenting. She wanted to understand the mystery, to piece together the history that had claimed so many lives. After speaking to some of the locals, she discovered a small abandoned library on the outskirts of town. Rumor had it that the library held records of Evermore's history, including details about Arthur Finch and the people who had vanished over the years. The library's secret. Inside the dusty, forgotten library, Sarah found herself surrounded by the smell of old paper and the faint echo of memories long left behind. She sifted through faded documents, yellowed photographs, and brittle newspaper clippings. Hidden in the back of a drawer, she uncovered an ancient leather-bound journal with Arthur Finch's name etched on the cover. The journal detailed Finch's growing obsession with the afterlife after losing his family. He believed the cornfield was a gateway, a place where the boundaries between the living and the dead were thin. Finch wrote of his experiments, summoning rituals, and a dark presence he referred to as the Watcher, a figure he claimed would guide the souls that entered the field. The final entry read, "I see them now, the lost ones. They call to me. Tonight, I will join them." The cryptic entry sent chills down Sarah's spine, but she couldn't turn back now. She had to know what happened to those people, the teens, the sheriff, Tommy, and countless others whose lives the field had swallowed. A journey into the cornfield. That night, despite the townsfolk's warnings, Sarah entered the Evermore Cornfield alone. She was armed with a flashlight, her recorder, and Arthur Finch's journal. The air was thick, heavy with an unnatural silence, broken only by the occasional rustle of the corn. Shadows twisted and shifted around her as she ventured deeper, and she felt the weight of countless eyes watching her every move. As she walked, she noticed faint footprints on the ground, scattered belongings, and even a flashlight lying abandoned. It seemed as if each step she took brought her closer to the past, closer to the souls who had never left. The deeper she went, the more distorted her surroundings became. The cornstalks grew unnaturally tall, closing in around her, making it nearly impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. Suddenly, her flashlight flickered, casting brief flashes of light that illuminated shadowy figures standing between the rows of corn. Sarah's breath hitched as she realized she was no longer alone. The Watcher. In the darkness, a tall figure began to emerge. The Watcher, with hollow, piercing eyes and a silent, sinister grin. He was draped in tattered clothes that seemed to merge with the corn itself, his face obscured by shadows. Sarah froze, the hair on the back of her neck prickling as the Watcher extended a hand, beckoning her forward. A voice echoed in her mind, faint but unmistakable. "Stay, forever." The words repeated, growing louder, and Sarah felt an inexplicable pull toward him. She fought against it, clutching the journal tightly. She flipped through the pages, her shaking hands landing on a passage that spoke of breaking the bond, a ritual to end the field's curse. Arthur Finch had written of the ritual but never attempted it. To free the souls trapped in the cornfield, he claimed, someone had to sacrifice themselves willingly, offering their life to satisfy the Watcher. Only then could the lost souls find peace. The choice. Sarah's mind raced as she realized the implications. The Watcher stepped closer, and the shadowy figures of the lost appeared around her. James, Emma, Chris, Lila, the sheriff, and even young Tommy, their faces pale and their eyes empty. They seemed to plead with her, their expressions filled with a sorrowful desperation. Sarah faced a choice. She could flee and leave Evermore to its curse, or she could offer herself, ending the cycle of horror that had plagued the town for generations. She looked at the lost souls surrounding her, understanding their pain, their endless, tormented existence within the cornfield. Summoning every ounce of courage, Sarah called out, "I'll stay, if you let them go." Her voice wavered, but she stood firm, the weight of her decision sinking in. The Watcher's eyes gleamed, and he nodded slowly, as if acknowledging her sacrifice. The figures of the lost souls began to fade, their faces softening into expressions of peace. James, Emma, Chris, Lila, and even the sheriff all looked at her, a silent thank you in their hollow eyes, before dissolving into the mist. Tommy was the last to disappear, his small hand reaching out to her in gratitude, before he, too, was gone. The cornfield's silence. As dawn broke, the townsfolk gathered at the edge of the cornfield, hoping to see Sarah return. But the field was silent, still, and when they entered, they found only her journal, lying open on the ground, with a single entry written in Sarah's handwriting. "The souls are free. I am at peace." The field had claimed Sarah, but the curse was lifted. For the first time in decades, Evermore Cornfield felt different, as if a dark cloud had been lifted. The locals no longer felt the eerie pull or the strange whispers, and the field returned to an ordinary, if somber, place. A legend lives on years past, and the story of Sarah and the Evermore Cornfield became part of Evermore's history. People no longer feared the field, though many still told the tale of the brave historian who broke the curse. Some even claimed to see a lone figure standing at the edge of the field at dusk, her face serene, her spirit watching over the cornfield as a guardian of the lost souls she had freed. The legend of Evermore Cornfield endures, a chilling reminder of the horrors and sacrifices hidden within its depths. Though the field was no longer cursed, those who dared to enter at night sometimes still heard faint whispers, echoes of the past, and the voice of a woman who gave everything to end a nightmare, ensuring that Evermore Cornfield's secrets would never be forgotten.